Hello everyone, welcome to Diplomatic Briefing. At this critical moment of Sino-US aid and trade conflicts, the diplomatic community is also paying close attention to a summit hosted by China this week to welcome important trade partners from Latin America and the Caribbean. On May 13th, the fourth ministerial meeting of the China-CELAC Forum was held in Beijing. It is worth mentioning that, in addition to representatives from many countries in the region gathering in Beijing, the presidents of Brazil, Colombia, and Chile also attended. For a ministerial meeting, foreign media have analyzed that at this critical moment, China has managed to secure the support of 3 Latin American leaders. The UK's Guardian newspaper noted that the leaders of the 3 main Latin American economies collectively flew to Beijing to participate in the dialogue, expressing their desire to establish longer-term and more cooperative relations with China, and this happened at a time when US President Trump was initiating a trade war, bringing great uncertainty to the international situation. Bloomberg commented that this summit highlighted China's role in international affairs as its latest effort to expand its influence. Reuters further emphasized that the timing of this forum coincided with the positive results achieved in the China-US trade talks over the weekend, said Tay. Since Trump began imposing global tariff policies in April, China has consistently worked to build a global alliance to jointly resist the improper actions of the United States. China has already begun engaging with Southeast Asia and Central Asia, calling on its trading partners to jointly resist unilateral bullying and to defend multilateralism. During the trade negotiations, both sides also made significant progress, agreeing to set a minimum price for Chinese-made electric vehicles as an alternative to the European Union's previous plan to impose additional tariffs on Chinese electric cars. Meanwhile, tonight, the United States is also actively joining hands with China to discuss unity and development. Regarding the special timing of the China-Latin America Forum ministerial meeting, the New York Times quoted experts as saying that China is trying to emphasize its intention to maintain a solid foothold in the region. While the enthusiastic responses and participation from many Latin American governments reflect this as well, this also fully demonstrates that, in the eyes of countries looking forward to standing together with China, China is not only a crucial economic partner, but also a key force capable of counterbalancing US influence. Brazilian President Lula also made it clear that China's firm and powerful reciprocal tariff countermeasures are admirable. On the 14th, Beijing held a press conference regarding the visit to China. Lula stated bluntly that Brazil is not worried about becoming a target of Trump's retaliation because of its closer ties with China. This was in response to a question from a Western media reporter who asked whether Brazil was concerned that strengthening relations with China might lead to retaliation from Trump. Lula said that Brazil is not afraid of retaliation from the United States. As a major country, Brazil has its own policies and positions. He hopes that Trump can understand Brazil's position and also hopes that Trump does not forget that the United States has a significant trade surplus with Brazil. Lula emphasized that deepening cooperation with China will not affect Brazil's development of relations with other countries. Speaking about the impact of China-US trade negotiations on Brazil, Lula said Brazil is not worried about competing with the US in quantity or quality of its products. He believes international trade should benefit all, and that more countries buying means economic prosperity and social development. Both Brazil and the US can improve their people's well-being together through trade. Therefore, there is no issue of being afraid of competition. The New York Times pointed out that over the past 20 years, China has purchased large quantities of minerals and other resources from Brazil, Peru, Chile, and other Latin American countries. At the same time, Chinese products, including automobiles and home appliances, have greatly enriched the Latin American market. China's investments have also contributed to the infrastructure of these countries, such as bridges, dams, and ports. They have provided financial support in response to the tariff policies implemented by the United States since Trump's first term. China has also increased its purchases of soybeans, iron ore, and other products from Latin America. According to statistics from Chinese customs, In 2024, bilateral goods trade between China and Latin America reached nearly $519 billion, about double a decade ago, before the China-CELAC Forum. When President Xi Jinping attended a ministerial meeting, he stressed there are no winners in tariff or trade wars, and that bullying and hegemony only lead to isolation. He called for China and Latin America to jointly build a China-Latin America community with a shared future. As part of the cooperation initiatives, China will implement a visa-free policy for the first batch of 5 Latin American and Caribbean countries, CHA. Over the next 3 years, China will provide 3,500 government scholarships and 10,000 training opportunities in China to CELAC member countries. There will also be 500 international Chinese language teacher scholarship slots, 300 training opportunities for poverty alleviation technical personnel, and 1,000 group slots for the Chinese Bridge program to visit China. In addition, 300 small but beautiful livelihood projects will be implemented among other initiatives. The Chinese government is also willing to provide the equivalent of 66 billion yuan in credit to Latin America. This support will be provided for China-Latin America cooperation in various fields, including martial arts. In his speech, Xi Jinping quoted an old Chinese saying, "The joy of life is having friends who understand your heart." Latin America has a proverb, "He who has a friend has a treasure." No matter how the international situation changes, China remains a good friend, partner to Latin American and Caribbean countries. First, although the China-US tariff war has paused, given Trump's unpredictability, US politicians' strategy of containing China remains unchanged. China must be prepared on all fronts. Second, cooperation with Latin America not only ensures China's energy, mineral, and food security, but also strengthens its influence in what is considered America's backyard. This is a matter of strategic importance. Third, under US hegemony, Latin American countries have been unable to break through the middle-income trap for decades. China's success in leading development through technology offers them a glimmer of hope for breaking this deadlock. Visionary Latin American leaders will not miss the chance to deepen cooperation with China. Meanwhile, foreign media note that China is not only buying Latin American agricultural products to replace US goods, but also making strategic investments in overseas ports to respond to the US-China trade war. On May 12th, the Wall Street Journal reported China plans to secure access to South America's agricultural products. Does Brazil's port of Santos fit into this overall plan? This aging port is the main gateway for the export of soybeans and other agricultural products from South America. And for China, these agricultural products are the most feasible alternative source to replace US agricultural goods. According to the report, COFCO Corporation is building the largest export terminal outside of China at this port. It will be used for handling the transportation of corn, syrup, and soybeans. The Wall Street Journal noted that since COFCO entered the Brazilian market in 2014, the group has always relied on third-party terminals for transportation, which led to an increase in costs by about 15%. However, in March 2022, COFCO acquired this port through a bidding process. The 25-year operating rights for the TST-11 terminal solved this problem. At the end of last year, Bloomberg in the United States analyzed why COFCO's overseas expansion in a report pointing out this very issue. Santos said that the connection between the STS-10 terminal and the railway makes transportation costs lower than by truck, allowing COFCO to be more competitive when sourcing soybeans and corn from Brazil's main production areas. In addition, it reduces the likelihood that COFCO will have to pay extra high costs due to warehouse shortages or transportation delays. The STS-11 terminal project, with a total investment of $285 million from the central bank, began construction and renovation in 2023. At the end of March this year, it officially started operations. It is expected to reach full capacity next year, when its annual export capacity will increase from the current 4.5 million tons to 14 million tons. At the end of April, the New York Times reported that in addition to investing in Santos Port, the largest port in Latin America, China has poured substantial funds into warehouses, railways, ports, and other infrastructure in Brazil over the past decade. This is to enable more Brazilian agricultural products to be loaded onto Chinese ships. According to a review by the Wall Street Journal, in 2018, China Merchants Port Holdings acquired the container terminal operating company at Paranaguá, Brazil's second largest port. China Railway Group has also been actively involved in building a railway that connects Brazil's central agricultural belt with ports in the east and north of the country. As for COSCO Shipping Group in Peru, they are building a massive deep water port, Chanque Port, to accelerate trade between Asia and South America. The Chinese government is also in serious discussions with governments in the region about constructing an ambitious railway that would connect ports on Peru's Pacific coast with those on Brazil's Atlantic coast. The Wall Street Journal has noted that on April 28th, Chinese officials stated that China does not need to import agricultural products from the United States and can still achieve its 5% growth target this year. Agricultural market price analysts ultimately said that Brazil will fill this gap. In addition, regarding Argentina, the Wall Street Journal cited government data saying that since the first term of Trump, when tariffs were imposed on Chinese imports and China retaliated, the situation has changed. By 2023, Brazilian agricultural products accounted for about a quarter of China's total agricultural imports by value, while the US share had already dropped to 14%. The report states that currently Brazil supplies about 70% of China's soybeans, with around 30% of those transported through the port of Santos and the rest shipped via Brazil's second-largest port, Paranaguá, as well as the northern port of Itaqui. The massive cargo volume transported through Barcarena port would be too much for the port of Santos to handle. The Wall Street Journal points out that Brazil has a mild climate, allowing for up to 3 soybean harvests a year, and there is enormous potential for corn as well. However, Brazil lacks the kind of rail infrastructure for transporting soybeans and corn that the United States has, so most of these crops are mainly trucked to the port of Santos. As many as 20,000 trucks travel back and forth each day, causing traffic jams on the nearby highways that stretch up to 20 miles long. This has put significant pressure on the port. The investment by Chinese companies in the port of Santos is expected to greatly improve this issue. After the expansion, STS-11 terminal will become one of the largest terminals at the port of Santos. In addition, the substantial investments made by Chinese companies in Brazil's second-largest port, Paranaguá, have also significantly improved its operational capacity. To put it simply, even before taking office, Trump had already openly stated his intention to control the Panama Canal. The underlying motive is to be able to block China's main transportation routes for minerals and agricultural products from Latin America at any time. Over the past decade, China has continuously invested in infrastructure in Latin America, primarily to facilitate and improve the efficiency of freight transport between China and the region, and also to ensure the security of these shipments. Well, if China were to rely on the Panama Canal's opening for the long term, the risks would be extremely high. Trump's aggressive seizure of the canal has already proven that this kind of risk has become a reality. That's why when China launched the Belt and Road Initiative more than a decade ago, it was already making preparations, including projects like Brazil's offshore ports. This directly connects Latin America and Asia, eliminating the need to go around the Panama Canal. China is also making arrangements, developing major ports in Brazil, so goods can be loaded directly onto ocean-going container ships from Brazil. If the Panama Canal is ever blocked, shipments can take a slightly longer route across the Atlantic and through the Red Sea to reach China. In addition, by investing in land infrastructure projects between Brazil and Peru, Brazil's minerals and agricultural products can be transported overland to Peru, then shipped from Pacific ports to China. This shows China has made strategic preparations. If the US decouples or China-US trade stops, China could still secure minerals, grain, and stay connected to the global market.